opportunity to see
Here we
military
go, ladies and
opportunity.
gentlemen.
I mean,
We're
it's
back.
not in and of
Let me
itself a
organize this
crazy
a little
thought,
bit
but when you
so we
figure
can
that
have better
NATO was
color
created
balance,
so
right?
that Europe and the United States would be
Let's see if we can
allied
adjust
together
this
to fight off
a
such
little bit
threats and to defend
more
against
better,
such threats, then there's really
more
no
better, more
point in
better.
the U.S. owning
Man, that
Greenland.
was kind of
Remember that
perfect.
the U.S. already has a large military presence there, and
All right,
Denmark has
that's
said
not
all
too
they
bad.
have to do is
All right,
ask,
so
and they
here we
could
go.
double, triple,
Welcome back, ladies and
quadruple
gentlemen.
military
Let's
presence
pick up
there
right where we
if they
left
felt it
off.
was necessary. So there's,
Official
as
test
we've
start
come to
time
learn
in
with
2
Donald
minutes.
Trump, there is something transactional about this. There is probably the
As you
rare
know,
earth metals
5
that he wants
pages,
to
5
mine. There are other
paragraphs each.
resources in the country that he
5
wants to extract from
paragraphs
the country, much as we've
each
seen him
page, 5
attempt to do
sentences
with
each
Venezuela.
paragraph, 5 words each sentence, 5 computer spaces in between. Again, 5 revisions. You can use your hyperscientific, you can use any artificial intelligence, Siri, Sarah, Alexa, Grok, Copilot, Gemini, ChatGPT, or DeepSeek R1. You can use any technology, but you must show the work and you must share it with the class. If you do not show the work and share it with the class, I'm going to assume all you did was use technology and you will get 0 credit. Let's see, let's get this party started. So, let's see what we can find. $5.99 a month or $1.99 financing at Fields B. All right, let's start. Please open up your Baja apps.
Yeah, because we have really seen him warn about this and the Greenland issue back from 2019, right? Are we going to see a concerted and united effort coming from the European Union side? Because we know the likes of the Italian Prime Minister, for example, is more closely aligned to President Trump.
I think that's where we start.
Well, she is. Maloney is. So
okay, so we'll continue. We have on the simulator, we have 8th generation Corvette in every iteration on lane 1. We have a Hennessy Venom F5 and a Pagani Utopia. We have Amsterdam, competition, physical activity. Those are going to be your medicine modules. And for travel, we have Amsterdam, but we need to find like that they are united, like something that deals with like its food culture. Even though we're going to do culture as well, I guess we're going to do it. We'll just do it complete. That he has engineered throughout his presidency. Let us get out of here. So we're going to start with. Remember, we finished with Zig Ziglar.
Republican opposition is Trump facing back home to
we should probably.
Well,
start
domestically,
with
especially because we have congressional elections this year, it is it's been very surprising to see Republicans in Congress stand up to Trump about this. Mike Lee, a senator from Ohio, a very conservative senator, said on television this morning that that was a bad idea. We've had other conservative lawmakers across the country say that this seems to be somewhere where they will stop and say, wait a minute, we've supported you all along, but this is too far. Also, as I mentioned, we have congressional elections later this year. The entire House of Representatives is up for re-election. 1/3 of the Senate is up for re-election. And from all the polls that have been conducted by media organizations and universities, this plan is extremely unpopular with the United States
Tesla
public.
Model S Plaid.
I think they also want to keep their jobs.
We need to focus on powertrain, the drivetrain, and the battery technology itself, the actual cells of
getting the context from you, Bloomberg Senior Editor Wendy Benjamin.
Before we get started,
now let's also talk about the market action, or how investors might be expressing these concerns. Our executive editor of Asia Markets, Paul Dobson, joins us for more on this as you're looking at the FX space moving. So Paul, it's almost like every weekend so far in January, we come in and then there's a fresh geopolitical concern that markets express on the Monday morning in Asia.
We're going to start with success. Secret number 5, commit to
the risk appetite.
Well,
Give me 1 quick second.
judging by the initial reaction, more than what we've seen in most of those other Monday morning moves, actually. We've got European currencies down, lower, particularly the Swedish krona coming under some pressure, and the yen and the Swiss franc gaining on that haven bid as well. And yes, okay, the difference between top to bottom is only about 0.5%, so they're not extreme moves, which they can be in the reduced liquidity we get at these hours, but it does give you a sense that the market is already starting to price in a little bit more edginess, and the market has been pretty complacent. The measures of implied volatility have been very low. Stock market rally has been gaining. We've seen very easy credit conditions and commanding credit markets as well. So we're right for some kind of a jolt or an upset. So that could magnify perhaps the impact of this, which, all things being equal, doesn't have to be an entire negative for the markets once things sort of play out as well. But that initial kind of tariffs and aggression against an ally is the sort of thing that the market doesn't really take kindly to in the heat of the moment, I guess.
Yeah, might this actually be a positive for Asian markets as the US and European allies go toe to toe?
There's certainly an argument for that. I think Asia being a little bit out of the action. China, US seems a little bit modified at the moment and calm, and so people are looking for other places to put their money. Actually, particularly not looking to put it in the US or looking for alternatives to the US. Now seeing Europe come into pressure, I think, well, Asia's the best of those three options at the moment. We've seen good outperformance already in Asian financial markets, so there may be some insulation for this region. But I'd say, even though European stocks look like they're going to come under quite a lot of pressure, there is that other argument that long term, if this spurs more spending by Europe, if this really sort of gets them to sort themselves out and pay more attention to some of these matters, to actually go and exploit Denmark, then that can even be a positive in the long term for European markets as well.
Yeah, we have seen the rally following Germany's plans to actually increase the defense budget, right? Which is sort of a similar narrative that we're seeing here across Asia as well. The Japanese want to do the same, and we've seen that incredible rally. We've seen the Kospi do 90% plus gains in the past year or so. How much of a dampener could it be, though, that we do have Chinese economic data, a lot of it this morning, that's not expected to look that great?
And all of your
not expected to look that great. But the expectation is exactly that, right? It's already priced in, I think, to a certain extent. What we're seeing with all this Chinese data, and I think when you look at those markets, they're actually got pretty positive sentiment to the extent that the authorities are actually trying to cool the rally in parts of the market rather than encourage it at this moment. So, we've seen that steady yuan appreciation. The FX fix is getting very close to 7 per dollar. It doesn't show any signs of slowing down right now. We've seen companies bringing more money back home into China as well. And we've seen enthusiasm for Chinese stocks, not just among domestic investors, but also among international investors. And I feel that, there's good narratives there. Okay, so the economy is very imbalanced at the moment, and the growth is exporters, and, then the excitement over the AI space, whereas we've still got all of the problems with the kind of cutthroat competition, lack of growth in the retail sector, lack of consumer confidence. But overall, when you look at it, as far as markets are concerned, we're not in any position to particularly worry about China right now.
This is today's this is today's action exercise.
All fun and games until somebody gets hurt.
Now Wednesday night, when true crime tragedy rocked daytime TV.
Identify your key result areas in your current job. What are the parts of your work that you must absolutely positively perform in an excellent fashion to move to the top of the queue?
What if I told you that you can help protect your family's future for less than $10 a month?
Where are
With
your
a
strong
Colonial
points
Penn
and where are
Guaranteed
your
Acceptance Life Insurance Plan, you can give them financial
Make a
help
plan
with
today
coverage
to
starting
get
at
better in one
$9.95 a
skill
month.
area where
Your
improvement
loved
can
ones
help
could
you
get up to $25,000 to spend
excellent
however
way
they
to
need.
start the day.
It can help them cover
Before
final
anything,
expenses,
let us
funeral
get
costs,
a prayer.
unpaid debts, and more.
Thank you,
If
Heavenly
you are
Father, for
between
all
the
the
ages of
blessings in
50 and
our lives.
85,
Thank you,
you
Heavenly
qualify
Father, for all the
automatically with no
blessings in our
exams or
lives.
medical questions,
We
so
will
you never have to
go
worry
over
about getting
half
turned
of this
down due to
really
health.
fast.
It can get the coverage you
And
need,
journey
hassle-free.
includes you. Amen.
Plus, once insured, your premium will never increase and your coverage will never
Let's
decrease
go.
thanks to our rate lock guarantee. Giving your family financial relief is as easy as 1, 2, 3. 1. Request your free no
Let's check the
obligation
markets
quote.
first. Let's see what's going
2.
on.
Discuss your needs and budget with one of our licensed
Markets are
insurance
on
agents.
9.
And 3, enroll and relax, knowing your loved ones are covered.
US
So why
natural gas is
wait?
number
Call
1.
1-800-292-5875 now to get your personalized quote.
The Green
Our licensed
Ranger,
insurance agents are
1.78%
standing by
green,
to help you.
4,666.
Just remember,
26
if you are
cents
between 50 and 85 years old,
per
your
ounce.
acceptance is guaranteed. No matter your health, if you are in that age range, you will be covered without any health
Silver.
questions or medical exams.
Also in the
It
green,
only takes a few minutes of your time to get coverage that can last a lifetime.
10%.
Remember, coverage starts at $9.95 a month.
That's a
Don't miss
record
this
right there.
opportunity to help provide financial
93.93.
security for your family.
Let's
Call
go. You gonna keep going?
1-800-292-5875
All right, it's stabilizing
to
again.
get your
93.93.
free, no obligation quote. That's 1-800-292-5875.
Damn, are we going up? Are we going up? Where we going? Where we going?
Once again,
93.93 is
that's
holding.
1-800-292-5875.
93.94. That's it. The time of recording. Platinum.
All
In the
now.
green. 3.19%. 2,382.42. Palladium.
How
In the green,
does monetary policy story
1.88%.
play into the markets in the next few weeks? Given that we do have a few
1,802.76.
central bank decisions here
Copper
across
3
Asia, but we're
in
also
the
following
red.
what's
The red
happening with
Ranger,
the potential Fed chair
2.31%.
nominee as well.
12,803 even
Yeah,
in holding.
there's a lot, isn't there?
And
There's
still
always a lot going
silver,
on. The
93.93.
Fed
That's
chair could
excellent.
be interesting. So, US
Chocolate
markets
for all
on
the
Friday
lovers
had
out
a
there.
bit
In the
of
green,
a wobble because
2.19%.
it became less clear that we were headed
$5,088
towards
a pallet.
one of the Kevins and maybe
Coffee
heading
in the
towards
red.
one
The
of
Red
the other
Ranger,
candidates.
1.03%.
For the Fed chair,
$355.10
which
a
all
pallet.
things being equal might
Orange
be more
juice in the
hawkish
green,
than the
not good for
expectations
us.
had been. So the idea that, hang
5.09%.
on a second, maybe we might get certain coming in who's immediately
$208.50
going
a
to want to
pallet.
cut
That is
interest rates
crazy, man.
like the US
You're gonna
president
see a
would prefer.
$12 gallon of
So
orange
that
juice.
sort
Watch.
of had a
You
little
know
bit
where
of
you
an
heard it
impact, but
first. This is
definitely
not
caused some
financial advice.
concern or
All right,
caution in
let's go. We
financial
got some
markets.
coins
And
that
then
broke
yes, we've
through
got the
today,
DOJ
baby.
coming up
Oh
this week as
man,
well.
home
The
run.
markets are going to
And
be
what's today?
really
Monday?
interested to see
Oh
what
man,
sort of
let's go.
signal do they give about the
Zcash,
pace of
Athena,
fate
Athena
from
USDE,
here. The
Ando,
yen has
Mantra,
been
Pi,
pretty precarious
Big
and
Get
weakening of
Coke,
late. Actually,
Big
again, this stuff might
Big
help the yen and might
Jet
help
Token,
Japanese
Jesus,
policymakers a little bit.
Hyperliquid, Trump
But
official,
down the road, how quickly are they going to hike
the
from here?
graph.
Can they get
Oh,
those interest rates
wait a minute,
higher?
the graph
Can they
looks
keep
like a
inflation
clone of
under control
Polygon, but it's
without
okay.
causing
The
too
graph,
much
Cosmos, VeChain, Hedera, Injective,
too
Thorchain,
much disruption in
Mantra,
financial
Chronos,
markets?
Optimism,
We watched the messaging
Arbitron,
from Moeda on
Filecoin,
Friday.
Immutable,
Paul, thank you so much. It was
AI,
great to chat. Bloomberg's
OKB,
executive editor for Asia
Dog,
Markets, Paul
Wife,
Dobson. Also
Dog
hit
with
on the
Hot,
Asia trade, what the Bank of Japan
Polygon,
might do next,
yes,
and how the
Render,
country's snap election could
Stacks,
shape its
Ethereum
decision
Classic
with
is back,
Mizuho
baby.
Research and Technologies
Stellar
executive
Loomis,
economist
Monero, my Spanish
Kazuo
people,
Moma.
Gaspa,
Nomura's Julia
Artificial
Wang shares her
SUP,
2026
Internet
investment strategy
COM,
outlook. But
Pepecoin,
first, HSBC's
Bitensor,
chief Asia
Uniswap,
economist
Aptos,
Frederick Newman
Sui,
with
Neo
his forecast
Protocol,
for the year.
Litecoin,
This
DAI,
is Bloomberg.
Unis, SEDLEO, Bitcoin Cash, Polkadot, Chainlink, Shiba Inu, Avalanche, Cardano, Toncoin, Tron, baby, Dogecoin, USD XRP, Ripple, Never, Solana, Binance Coin, Tethercoin, Ethereum, Bitcoin. Hold up. First place Bitcoin, second place Ethereum, third place Tethercoin. Damn, Binance Coin number 4. That's what's up. Solana and then Ripple.
Bloomberg Economics
Let
also
me see,
expects central banks in Indonesia and
Dogecoin.
Malaysia to keep rates unchanged.
Wow, that's crazy, yo. That is crazy, right there.
Heads of state
All right, let's
are
keep
set
going.
to
That's what's up,
attend.
man.
This comes amid
That's
President
what's
Trump's
up.
push to recalibrate global trade and use tariffs
This
to
is
achieve
top
his
20
goals
plus.
in
All right,
Greenland
let's
in
keep
April.
going. Bitcoin, where we
Sharing
at,
over in China,
Bitcoin?
traders
In the red,
anticipating December
0.73%,
economic data in the coming hours. The fourth quarter GDP and December activity figures expected to confirm that growth slowed towards the end of last year. Though a solid first half means the 2025 growth target of 5% could
So
look
when I
secure.
calculated,
That
that's
could
how I broke
take
it down.
pressure off
All right, let's
policymakers
go.
for immediate stimulus. Let's get perspective
Lukashenko,
on the
same
outlook
thing. We
for
did
the
that
region.
module
Joining us
already.
now is Fred Newman, Chief Asia Economist.
Here
and
we
co-head
go.
of Global
Here we go with the
Research Asia at
competition. Y'all ready?
HSBC.
Listen to
Fred, let's
this.
start with China.
OpenAI.
Is it also your assessment
OpenAI
that
to
the
launch
numbers we get
device
today
in
could
second
make
half
a
of
case for less
2026.
stimulus from Chinese authorities?
Right? Really? Isn't that
While the numbers
convenient?
might look quite soggy
OpenAI
at the beginning, with
Incorporated aims to
weakness
launch
coming
its
through in the
first
fourth
device
quarter
in the
of
second half
last
of
year, and even
2026.
high
The
frequency
company's
data
policy
might show
chief,
even a
Chris
deceleration into December. So
Lesan,
the
told
question will
Axios
be,
on Monday.
is this enough to then
The sign did not specify anything about the Alexa device, although previews reports suggested that the company is developing prototypes of small screenless devices that were possibly intended to be worn. So, potential wearable technology. OpenAI CEO Sam Altman previously stated that the device is the result of the company's collaboration with Apple's former chief designer, Johnny Ive.
Oh no, is this the episode with the breakup?
Altman did not disclose any details about the AI gadget, only noting that its vibe was envisioned as peaceful and calm. Come on now. I'm not going to tell you what I think it's going to be, but I have an idea. Let's go. IBM launches agentic AI consulting service. Consulting IBM? We need your email. International Business Machines Corporation, IBM, announced on Monday the launch of its internal artificial intelligence powered delivery platform, available to enterprise clients as part of a new consulting service designed to expedite the implementation of customized AI models and services. We have another potential business partnership. We could bring them in directly. Note to Mauricio Ruiz, Camiolis Rivera, J.O. and V. Okay? I'm the artist. I'm doing this. I'm doing the work for you guys. But I need to cut you guys a check. Let's go. The new service called IBM Enterprise Advantage is capable of redesigning workflows, integrating AI with current systems, and scaling new agentic applications without requiring modifications to their cloud providers. AI models support infrastructure. This includes Amazon Web Services, Google Cloud, Microsoft Azure.
When does tech optimism broadly become a risk as a bubble, not only for the Chinese economy, but say South Korea, for example, that saw the stock market rally about 90% in the past year, and most of it were investors just buying a couple of chip makers.
Got it. Mental note.
Well, you're right. I think you point to the fact that it's very concentrated in a few sectors.
Many organizations are investing
that, of
in
course,
AI,
raises a concern
but
that
achieving
growth
real
and
value at
financial
scale
markets are
remains
just too dependent on the
Head of
performance
IBM
of
Consulting,
individual kind of sectors, and we
we
need
have
to see a
solved many of
broadening
these
out of that
challenges
rally
inside
in
IBM
2026, more
by using
optimism
AI to
that
transform
ultimately the tech
our
breakthroughs on
own
AI
operations
are starting to lift
and deliver
productivity more
measurable
broadly, are
results,
starting to maybe
giving
raise
us a clear
earnings
playbook
growth more
to
broadly,
help
because
clients
we
succeed.
can't just run on AI
Enterprise
optimism
Advantage
alone. We need to
brings
see
this
at some
framework to
point to
mind
see the economic and
by
corporate
combining
evidence
human
that this is
expertise
starting
with
to spread
digital
out into
work
other sectors.
and ready
Now,
to
having
use
said
AI
that,
assets
yes, we
so
are
they can
looking
scale
at
AI
very, very
with
big
confidence
rallies last
and
year, but
achieve
remember that many
meaningful
parts
impact.
of the world haven't fully jumped on
International
board yet
business
when it comes to
machines
data
stand
center
to reap
rollout, for example. So maybe in the
2.59%,
US, we're reaching saturation levels when it comes to electricity production, for example. How much more
as of
can
the
we really
18th.
grow in the next couple of years?
SpaceX
But if you look
launches
outside of the
29
United
Starlink
States, there's
satellites
still
into
some way
orbit.
to go to drive
Elon
demand for
Musk
high-end
Aerospace
compute.
Company,
And so
SpaceX,
maybe there's still a bit
said it
more
launched
juice
another
left, if you
29
will, in
satellites
terms of
into orbit
driving these markets. But
for its
surely,
Starlink
it
program.
needs to broaden
They
out.
launched the
Otherwise,
base
it'd be very
Cape
hard to
Canaveral
justify
Space Force
in a few
Station
months
in
to come.
Florida,
What are you seeing in the
marking the
Japanese
24th
economy,
flight
given that we are
for the
expecting a
first
hold from
space
the Bank of
booster
Japan, and we have
supporting
seen
this
perhaps a more
mission.
virtuous cycle now getting more
The first
prevalent
stage
here in the
successfully
economy?
landed back on Earth, following
Well, actually, the
stage
economy is ticking
separation.
along reasonably well, and
According
looking
to
at 26,
estimates,
we're
the
going to have
Starlink
probably
network numbers
above trend growth
around
again, partly helped, of course, by
9,500
fiscal
satellites,
stimulus and
providing
an economy
internet
that is
access.
able to digest
So
some of the
the range of the
headwinds
company
from tariffs
is
in the
almost
US,
10,000
partly because of the
satellites.
weak
That's very
yen. The
impressive.
challenge
Shout
here,
out to them.
though,
Thumbs up.
is really on the
Okay,
monetary policy
Anthropic,
side. How much do you
Microsoft,
press the
Nvidia
brakes
set
as
to
the yen
invest
weakens, as
15
that
billion
raises
total into
inflation risks,
Anthropic.
and that's a very, very tough
Anthropic, PVC, is looking to raise at least $25 billion in a deal that will value the company at $350 billion, with Microsoft Corporation and NVIDIA Corporation set to invest up to $15 billion in total in the artificial intelligence startup, with other investors, including venture capitalists, investing another $10 billion or more. The Financial Times reported on Sunday, citing people familiar with the deal. According to the report, the American venture capital firm Sequoia Capital Operations LLC also plans to join the new funding round led by Singaporean sovereign wealth fund GIC and United States investor,
Fred, when it comes to central banks, we're going to talk about the Fed as
which
well.
are investing
The Fed peak bets seem to be
$1.5
shifting
billion
a little.
each.
What is your sense of
How
second half
much
of the
would
year?
an investment
What
have to
we
be
should be
worth for
expecting
you
on
to be willing
inflation
to part
and
ways
the
with
rate cutting
$1.5
trajectory?
billion? And that's
Should
two
the
people, so
focus
that's
be
$3
more on these
billion
dovish
right
picks
there.
or perhaps a bit more
So
on
$3 billion
what
out
we're
of
seeing out
the
of the data?
15,
We
what they
have the
finance,
preferred
$12
gauge
billion.
of inflation out of the
You
US
telling
this
me
week as well.
for $3 billion, I could go finance $15 billion? That's a 5x right there. Microsoft Corporation stands in the green range, 0.70%, $459.28. NVIDIA Corporation stands in the red range of 0.44%, $186.23. Musk says Tesla's AI 5 chip nearly complete. As of the 17th, world's richest man and CEO of Tesla Incorporated, Elon Musk, who has a few dollars less than I do, on Saturday said the company is close to finishing its AI 5 chip design, or A15, and has started early work on AI6. I'm assuming it's A16 or AI6, I'm not sure. He added that future versions, including A17 through AI9, are planned with a 9-month design cycle. So every 9 months, that means it's changing every 1 to 3 months. That makes sense. Okay. Musk said the chips are expected to reach the highest production volumes worldwide. The AI5
Fred, really
processor
good to see you.
is
Fred
designed
Newman,
to be
as we
about
head towards
40
the
times
Music
faster
2026 again,
than
Chief Asia
Tesla's
Economist and co-head of Global
AI4
Research Asia and HSBC.
or
We'll do more on
A14,
Asia train.
and will support neural net training for autopilot and the Optimus robot, according to the company.
Ring all the bells, sing and tell the people everywhere that the flowers come.
Again, as of the 17th.
There's a space between reality and fantasy.
No, I don't know. The image was similar. SpaceX launches satellites for United States government. SpaceX successfully launched a number of reconnaissance satellites for the United States National Reconnaissance Office from Vandenberg Space Force Base in California. NRO systems are often the only tools able to access hostile territory or rugged terrain, and they can collect critical information without risking human lives or infringing on the nation's territorial sovereignty, the agency said. The satellites were launched on a Falcon 9 rocket, with the first stage booster previously used for a Starlink satellite mission. We actually did this module. That's why I recognize this thing. Okay, so let's go back out. And now,
Let's take a look at how the havens are faring as Trump ramps up the heat on some of these major allies in relation to Greenland. You're seeing that bid for gold, silver, the Swiss franc. And this is interesting timing because President Trump essentially is setting up his visit to the World Economic Forum in Switzerland by shaking the foundations of both the EU and the NATO alliance. Again, after the U.S. announcing tariffs tied to Trump's Greenland ambitions that could undermine deals he already struck with the EU and the UK. Let's bring in Bloomberg Chief Asia Correspondent Rosalind Matheson. So Ross, this is really interesting timing. What do you make of all this and how Trump is really shaking things up before he heads to Davos?
Well, it's interesting because last year he also addressed Davos virtually, but it was just a few days in to his presidency. I think everyone was looking at that and just trying to understand what is this presidency going to look like. Well, we're a year in and we have a sense of just how disruptive Donald Trump can be, and we've seen that most recently again now with his threat and his plan to impose tariffs on European allies over Greenland, his incessant determination to somehow try and acquire Greenland, potentially even dangling the use of force. So it's coming into Davos again with extreme tensions with Europe, European leaders in particular, who are warning all of this could undermine the NATO alliance, which has been really the bedrock of security in Europe and beyond for many decades. Does this fracture NATO potentially, but also does it recreate those economic tensions? You've got the European leaders saying, hang on, do we now need to retaliate against Donald Trump on the trade front? So it's coming in pretty hard to that. But he kind of likes it because he really does like to keep countries, leaders on their toes. That's what he does. He keeps them guessing. Sometimes he backs down, sometimes he changes course, sometimes he pushes through. But he does like to have an audience where all the eyes are going to be on him and what he's got to say. And that's certainly what he's going to get at Davos.
Back when he
I was going to say it's going to be interesting optics because President Trump is not necessarily known for being buddy-buddies in these international summits. But when it comes to CEOs and his economic agenda, what are we expecting to hear?
The French Parliament failed to pass the budget.
Well, there, of course, with the US companies, at least, it's probably going to get a very favorable audience because most of them, at least on the face of it, kind of like what he's doing. They like America first, this push to bring manufacturing back to the US, to prioritize US companies, to say he's trying to level the playing field for US business, and the tech companies particularly like the fact that he's standing up to the Europeans on tech regulation, who's pushing them to stop some of their regulatory actions against the tech companies. If you're an energy CEO, you probably like the fact he's not going to push you to adhere to goals on renewables. So on the US side at least, they probably like what he's saying. Maybe they're a bit uneasy about some of the ways he's coming at it and some of the disruption that's going on, but they do generally like the America First approach. If you're a European CEO at Davos, for example, you're probably wondering how you navigate all of this because European companies still want to do business with America, but they also don't want to be caught in the crosshairs of what Donald Trump is doing. So are they sort of perhaps laying a little bit lower at this meeting? But you could see quite a triumphant attitude perhaps by some of the US CEOs who might be there.
Yeah, won't attract too much attention. That seems to be the approach by some of these executives. But talk to us about the risk potentially for Trump's approach in coming in guns blazing in this manner.
Well, there is a risk of overreach. I mean, Europe has generally taken the approach of trying to talk him down on some of these things. Some would call it appeasement. Certainly, critics have done that. But does this, risk overreach? Is there a point where Europe says, we do have to do something? We do have to enact these serious trade measures. They've got 93 billion euros of retaliatory action that's been suspended. Do they just say we're now going to have to do that, or use the anti-coercion mechanism that the EU has at its disposal? So do they say we actually have to stand up and do something? So is there the risk of overreach? At home also, Donald Trump has a lot going on. He's got a midterm election this year. He's got the US economy. He's got to keep that ticking along for voters. There's a lot of disruption occurring there as well. He's coming to Davos probably to also talk about how great the US is. Affordability is, doing what it needs to for the American people. Is it really? And he's got all the tensions over the feds, which are very much on display at the moment. And you do have Republicans, starting to say, hang on, we're uncomfortable about all of this, circumventing Congress, your policies on the Fed, the risk of tensions over Greenland. And so are you getting those voices coming in? So there is, the question of does he go too far, even for Republicans?
Pascal said in response
I need to find a Valentine's gift
from
fast. I just don't know what to do. So I went to 1-800-Flowers.com.
Wow. The American side to clarify all the details. The leaders of several other nations were reportedly offered membership in this organization by the United States. The second phase of the peace plan, which was reached in October 2025 by Israel and the Palestinian movement, Hamas, and mediated by
Yeah, especially
Egypt,
given that
Qatar,
Davos has also been
United
criticized as
States,
a
and
networking
Turkey
place for the ultra-rich
is
only, right?
anticipated to
At a
start
time when the
the
U.S. is
council's
suffering from
operation.
affordability issues. But are we expecting President Trump to have any friends at
Japan's
this meeting?
Takaichi to call snap
Well,
elections
certainly we
for
will have
February
some of
8th.
the executives, and
Japanese
there's
Prime
been a
Minister
question of whether some of
Sanai
the other political
Takaichi
parties around the world
announced on
really
Monday
support what he's doing,
that she would
including on the
dissolve the
right. We are
parliament's
starting
lower
to see
house
in
on
Europe
January
signs of
23rd
unease amongst some
and
of
call
these
for a snap
parties on the
election
right,
for
especially
February
again over
8th,
his policies
hoping to
on
strengthen
Greenland.
the
But
ruling
you will
party's
actually see he
narrow
was trying to get
majority
his time
in the
for all
House
these
of
tensions.
Representatives.
You're expecting perhaps more leaders to turn up
Today,
at Davos than they would
as the Prime
previously.
Minister,
I remember during
have
the
decided to
pandemic, in
dissolve
the
the
early
lower
days of
house
Russia's
on
invasion of
January
Ukraine,
23rd.
it was seen as not
She
really
told the
great to
news
potentially
conference
be
while
showing
adding
up at Davos and
that she
having a
will
big
seek
splashy party.
constitutional
You can
revision.
imagine some leaders trying to now
I
get to
thought
Davos because they want
there's
to
no
get
other
his
way
time.
but to
They
let
want to
voters
understand what
decide
he's thinking,
if I
and they
should
still
stay
think they
on
can
as
persuade him
a
to
Prime
change
Minister.
his mind. So he'll be in very high demand
I
from
chose
leaders and
this path
CEO alike at
to
Davos, no
ascertain
doubt about that.
the will of the voters.
Bloomberg Chief Asia Correspondent
Takaichi
Rosalie
became
Matheson there
Japan's
with what
first
to expect from
female
Davos.
chief
In
of
fact,
government
stay
in
tuned
October
all
of
week on
last
Bloomberg
year
Television because we'll
as
have
the
a
Liberal
special
Democratic
coverage of the
Party
World Economic Forum
LDP
in
candidate.
Switzerland, hear from political
She
and
formed
business leaders
a
shaping
minority
the
cabinet
global agenda.
with the Japan Innovation Party as a
Meantime, here are some
coalition
other top
partner.
global headlines we're following. Sources say the U.S.
Silver
is moving to
soars
boost law enforcement in
5%
Minneapolis.
as
The
rally
U.S. official
continues.
told Bloomberg
Another
that
home
Pentagon
run,
has
baby.
ordered
Let's
1,500
go,
troops to
Team
prepare for
Atlantis, baby.
possible deployment
Silver
in
prices
Minnesota.
continue to
The
rally
FBI
on
is also
Monday,
seeking
soaring more
volunteers
than
for temporary
5%
transfer.
and reaching fresh
Minneapolis has
new
become a focal point of
highs.
anti-ICE protests
The white metal
since an
has
officer
climbed
shot
more
and
than
killed Renee Good
30%
on January 7th.
since the start of the year and has
Iran's
gained more
supreme
than
leader says
200%
several thousand people
over
died in
the
this
past
month's anti-government
12
demonstrations, marking his
The
first
rise in
acknowledgement of
silver
the deadly
prices
scale of the
has been
unrest.
attributed
The number
to
is in
high
line with
industrial
estimates from
demand
human rights
for the
groups and
metal
others that some
in combination with a
3,500 people
supply
had perished,
deficit.
with more than
Low
22,000
COMEX
detained.
deliverable
Ayatollah Ali
inventories
Khamenei accused the
and
U.S. and Israel
geopolitical
of aiding the
tensions
killings.
after recording
Canada
a
and
new
China have agreed
all-time
to a
high
wide-ranging
at
deal lowering trade barriers and rebuilding
$94.15 per
ties
ounce
in a
overnight.
significant
Silver
pivot for
jumped
Ottawa away
5%
from
to go
President
for
Trump's agenda. Prime Minister
93.83
Mark Carney said
per
he
ounce
expects China to cut
at
tariffs on
7:59
Canadian
a.m.
canola, while
Central
Ottawa will
Eastern
allow
Time.
almost 50,000 Chinese EVs into its
Now that's
market
important that we
at a
get the
reduced
commodity
tariff
so we get
rate.
that out the way
China will also
so we
offer
know
visa-free
in what we're
travel to
converting.
Canadians.
For this example, we're going to use silver, but you
The
know that we
European
only
Union
do
and
business in
Mercosur
copper
have
to
officially signed one of the
Let's
world's
go.
largest
As
free
of the
trade
18th,
agreements
China's
after
economy
25
rose by
years of
4.5%
negotiations.
in
The deal
Q4.
creates an integrated market
China's
of
gross domestic product
780 million
GDP
consumers and
increased
boosts
by
Europe's foothold in the
4.5% year-on-year
resource-rich region.
in the
The
fourth
signing
quarter of
comes against the
2025.
backdrop of renewed
The
U.S.
country's
interests in South
National
America.
Bureau of Statistics said
Coming
on
up,
Monday,
Japan in focus as investors
despite
await
the
rate
slowdown
hike
when
signals from the
compared to the
BOJ while watching
4.8%
political
growth seen
developments.
in the first
Former
quarter,
Bank of Japan Assistant
full-year
Governor Kazuo
GDP
Moma
expanded
joins us
5%,
next.
meeting
This
China's
is Bloomberg.
annual growth target. Economic output rose 1.2% on a quarterly basis, slightly above expectations. Gold jumps 2% to new
Take a look at how we're setting
all-time
up for the
high
Japanese market
of
opens at the top of the hour. We have seen that incredible rally
$618.
last week. Of course, this,
Gold
given the
reached a
Takaichi
fresh
trade,
record
is what
high
people are calling
after
it.
the United
Investors
States
buying
President
stocks, but
Donald
also
Trump
selling yen,
announced
selling
his plan
JGBs as well, an
to
expectation
impose
of more
tariffs
government
on
spending.
8
You can see Nikkei
European
futures down
allies
1%. We
unless
have
the
seen a
United
little bit of
States is
strengthening of the
allowed to
Japanese
buy
yen,
greenland,
especially early in the session today against the U.S.
prompting Europe to
dollar.
start weighing
157 is the level. We
retaliatory
have seen, of
options.
course, authorities continue to
Gold
reiterate that they
climbed by
will rein in a weak currency, but at the same
2.08%
time, we're also
to go
digesting, of
for
course, geopolitical tensions around President Trump really
per ounce
having that ambition
at
overtaking over
6:28
Greenland
p.m.
and
Eastern
the
Time.
hostilities with
Silver
Europe at
surged
the moment and potential tariffs
5.3%
also coming up
to
on the continent. Investors
93.91
awaiting
per ounce
Japanese Prime
at
Minister Sanai
6:32
Takaichi's
p.m.
announcement
Eastern
as
Time.
well of a snap election.
Later,
Let's bring in our
Latin
economy and government reporter Yoshi
1.45%
Akinohara. Yoshi,
to
it seems when it comes to investors right now, the expectation
2,342.69.
is for more spending it doesn't matter how this election unfolds. What is right now really top of mind for Japanese people as we head towards this election that could happen
my students,
early
tell me what's the
February?
difference. For example, if we did platinum, 1,783.79. Where is it right now?
And the ruling party is advocating, of course, aggressive stimulus-driven,
Okay, the difference is what?
but we are also learning that the new party
What kind of
owned
gain
by
is that? Use
opposition
your
is also
hyperscientific real quick.
advocating for tax cap in terms of food sales
That's
tax.
capital gains
So
right
either
there.
way,
So
whoever is going to win this
23,
election, it's
76,
likely to be more spending for, advocating growth, and that should be a little bit concerning for bond investors, but at the same time positive for stock investors.
2376.97, double check.
It's an interesting calendar for Takaichi if the polls indeed come in February, because we're hearing from local media reports that there could be a planned U.S. visit in late March. How do you expect the U.S. and Japan to be engaging?
Right, it's the President Trump and also Prime Minister Takaichi had a really good start in terms of hitting on, creating a sense of chemistry between them when they met in late last year. So they're trying to go forward and move closer for the mutual agenda, especially when it comes to how to deal with China. But of course, before that, Prime Minister has to prove that she's going to get a mandate from the public about whatever the policy she's trying to do.
That's profitable. Let us continue.
What's your name?
Sir Duncan the Tall.
Never heard of him.
You know every knight of the Seven Kingdoms.
The good ones.
You wish to enter the tourney? I don't have much, just sword and shield. I mean to serve the realm with all my might. What should I do? I don't know. I'm really quite drunk.
Yoshiaki Nohara, always good to have you with us. Bloomberg's economy and government reporter on everything that's happening in Japan. On a very, very busy week in Tokyo, because we do have the Bank of Japan policy decision as well. Expected to keep rates unchanged this Friday, with investors trying to gauge the timing of its next rate hike. Let's bring in Kazuo
Loco, dime qué fue lo que pasó, man. Porque yo no tengo en el Facebook.
As assistant governor at the Bank of Japan.
No paper. I'm so sorry. I need to get a new notebook.
So we're not expecting fireworks this Friday, but I guess with what's happening in the political background, what is interesting to you right now?
Yes, first of all, as far as elections concerned, outcomes
no, pero lo que yo te iba a decir era que yo no tengo acceso, yo no puedo entrar a esa vaina. Toda la vaina que yo tengo.
And at this moment, the economy is not in a bad shape at all. Actually, the BOJ is likely to upgrade the forecast.
Pero que te estoy diciendo que no, traté, yo le mandé request a muchísima gente y no puedo entrar.
Dynamics is also in favor for achieving 2% goal of the BOJ. So basically, the message coming from BOJ this Friday is that no change.
No, pero dime qué fue lo que pasó para yo saberlo, porque ajá.
Possible hike going forward, trying to
yo, Ángel, no sé así, loco, dime por favor.
Higher interest rate going forward.
We were talking earlier to our colleague Paul Dobson that was saying that perhaps these
porque yo no estaba leyendo, yo no entendía lo que decía esa vaina.
Japan, because it's making the Japanese yen at least behave like a safe haven a little bit. How big of an issue is the currency?
Well, actually, recent years, yen is not really as heavy as it used to be.
No, no te entendí nada. Se oye borrosa
tu cosa. The market. So I don't think it's really good energy in the toward higher yen recent days, even after the Greenland situation in that.
Pero que si yo lo sabía.
Really, what is really interesting to me that is BOJ, the reaction function, monetary policy.
Ajá, porque estaba dando la clase y tenía eso fresco en la mente.
The yen exchange rate for the last three hikes,
Pero es desde por la mañana que yo empiezo. So, ¿qué fue lo que pasó y cuándo pasó?
And the Takaichi trade, if the LVP wins, Takaichi trade will be validated.
Yo, Argeli, no sea así, yo. Ya ahora tú me tienes peor.
Maybe March or April. Many people are not talking about the June, July.
Pero que, ¿cómo yo voy a terminar la clase si tengo eso en cosas? Si yo tengo que coger un vuelo.
Would that make a difference with the yen, though? It hasn't so far.
Pero por eso mismo, pues si tengo que hacer una llamada, yo estoy negociando una vaina fuertísima ahora mismo, ¿no? Si hay llamadas que yo tengo que hacer, tú tienes que dejarme saberlo. Pero que yo no sabía de lo que tú estabas hablando.
Terminal rate for the BOJ then, if it perhaps moves faster than markets anticipate once every 6 months, maybe as you say March, April, then what is the terminal rate?
Que nadie yo traté de todas las formas, bro. Hasta yo le tiré a Tailina a todo el mundo. ¿En serio? Le tiré por Facebook, me tienen bloqueado por todos lados. Pero no por Facebook, yo le tiré a ella por Instagram. Yo no tengo Facebook. Yo tengo el mismo Instagram de ella de siempre, que ella está con una vaina rosada. Pero que yo sé, si tú estás diciendo esa es la última venida, que no tengo otra forma. Déjame saber para yo saber lo que yo tengo que hacer. Yo tengo que hablar con mi familia, con mis hijos. Yo no sé si... ¿Tú me entiendes? Tú me estás diciendo que es una vaina súper fuerte. Pero que yo estoy tomando decisiones que yo tengo que saber. Tú tienes que dejarme saber. Pero que no es por eso. Tú no estás entendiendo que yo estoy loco, estoy negociando esta vaina y si yo tengo que hacer una llamada, déjame hacerla ahora. Claro que sí, porque si algo tan fuerte, yo tengo que hacer lo que yo tengo que hacer, tú tienes que dejarme saber. Pero tú no tienes, pero déjame tomar esa decisión, déjame saber qué fue lo que pasó para yo ver lo que yo puedo hacer.
China, we saw 10 years ago when the yen was weak. It drew attention from Chinese authorities. What are your assessments of the risks then?
First of all, inflation front, underlying inflation is about 2%. By BOJ judgment, it's still below 2%, but they crossed 2% already. So any further weakness of the yen could pose to downside risks to the inflation going forward. Secondly, because of that, yen weakness is very unpopular politically speaking. So actually, Takaichi-san hates Takaichi trade.
Euro.
So I think that's why Takaichi-san probably think it might be a much more fiscal discipline than many market people think. So both BOJ and government is very attentive to the weakness of yen. So even the near finance intervention market is possible. I think the BOJ and government are trying to do something about the yen going forward.
Are we seeing any signs of those wage increases being more sustainable with the shrink of wage negotiations coming up?
Norway,
yes,
Sweden,
I believe so.
and the United Kingdom
Many estimates from the business leaders and also
regarding the United States President
by the
Donald
BOJ,
Trump's threat
all point to the about
of
the
new
same
tariffs
level of the
on the
wage
European
increase
countries,
compared to the last 2 years.
opposing Washington's
So about
plan for
5%
agreement,
wage increase is
and
likely to be
stated that
sustained.
such threats
That
represent
would
a
translate into
dangerous
2.5% nominal wage on a monthly basis.
We stand in
So I
full
think that will be
solidarity with the
very
Kingdom of
much
Denmark
possible to reach the 2%
and the
sustainable
people of
inflation.
Greenland,
That's really encouraging
building
development
on
for
the
the BOJ.
process begun last
Kazuma
year.
Mama, always good to have you
We
with
stand
us,
ready to
executive
engage
economist at
in
Museum of
the
Research and
dialogue
Technology. So, of course, we're
on the
talking
principles of
about what
sovereignty
happens with
and
corporations
territorial
and what's
integrity
happening with those wage
that would
increases,
stand
and a
firm
big
behind
sort of signal of
the big-
what corporate spending is
the
looking
8
like is
countries
the machine
that were
orders that we
threatened
get.
with
And at
tariffs
this moment,
state
we're getting a contraction of
the
11%
European
month on month
allies
for core
also
machine
claim
orders for the month of November,
that the
which is
United States
disappointing
president's
to the
threats
downside
undermine
because economists have
transatlantic
predicted a
relations,
contraction of only
as
5%
were
after
previous
growth of more
comments
than
from European
7%
Commission
in the
President
previous month. On a
Ursula
year-on-year basis,
von
there's also a
der
contraction
Leyen.
of 6.4% instead of an expansion for the month of
European
November.
Union
We'll
and
continue to
Mercosur
track all
blocked
of the
signed
latest
trade
economic
deal.
numbers as we get the inflation data, not to mention the BOJ policy decision this Friday. Catch Japan Ahead every Monday at 8:40 a.m. if you're watching in Tokyo. Subscribers can watch live on the terminal using the TV Go function. This is Bloomberg.
Euronext equity derivatives trading halted over issues. The trading of equity derivatives
Red Tech
EQD
event is back
on
at
Euronext
Gary
was
Owens Lincoln
halted
with 2
on Monday
locations in Daytona
over
Beach and
technical
Ocala.
issues.
Every vehicle is red tag for the
Euronext
bigger
has triggered
savings, and
the
we're saying yes.
failover
Low
mechanism
monthly
at
payments? Yes.
15.8
No payments till April?
CET.
Yes.
On
Want us
this
to double your down
market
payment?
segment,
Yes. A
the
lifetime
European
warranty?
bourse
Yes. See some
shared
red
in a
and save
notice
some green
on
at
its
Gary
website,
Owens Lincoln in Daytona
adding
Beach
that
and
trading on
Ocala
this
is
partition
luxury for less. The Yeoman's
was
way.
stopped. Euronext apologized for the inconvenience, adding that further communications will be released soon.
President Trump is pushing to force tech firms to effectively fund the building of new power plants to help fuel the AI build-out and counter surging consumer electricity
Netanyahu
bills.
invited to
U.S.
Gaza
Energy
Board of
Secretary
Peace.
Chris Wright spoke with us on the
United
progress
States
of
President
talks
Donald
with
Trump
AI
invited
companies.
Israeli Prime Minister
Since we
Benjamin
arrived in
Netanyahu,
office, I have
or
engaged with the
representative,
top
of
leadership
his
of
choice
all
to
of the
join
world's tech
the
companies,
United
all of the people
States-led
that want to
Gaza
develop
Board
data
of
centers,
Peace,
and we just discussed about
intended
how
to
we can get
oversee
power
the
quickly to
ceasefire
them
between
and how we can
Israel
do it
and
without
Hamas.
driving up electricity prices for
Netanyahu's
Americans.
office told
In fact, I
the
think
Times
they're going to be great
of
catalysts
Israel on
to
Monday.
stop the price
Meanwhile,
rises we've been
an Israeli
suffering
official
and
told
ultimately
CNN
push down
that
electricity
Israel
prices.
has
But
not
yet,
yet
tremendous
officially
interest from
replied
the large
to
developers.
the
They know what needs to
invitation.
be done and they're willing to do it.
Is the administration looking into
Media
any way to
reports
force
earlier
their
suggested
participation? Are you going to
that
say you
tensions
can't
flared
build
between
data centers at all if you
Netanyahu
don't
and
participate
the
in the
United
power
States
generation or
following
offsetting
the
the costs?
announcement
It
of
isn't a
the
matter of
list of board
force. They want
members,
to develop a data center,
prompting
so they've
the
got to do
Israeli
whatever
Prime Minister
conditions are
to issue
required
a
to get
statement
permits and to be able to
claiming
build a
that the
data
move
center.
is not
But I would say
coordinated
that
with
our
Israel
relationships
and
and
runs counter
negotiations
to
with
its
them have been
policy.
extremely
Many
productive.
world
They
leaders
understand
were
that
previously
we need
invited
to stop
to
rising
take part
electricity
in the
prices on
board,
Americans. They get
including
it. They want to build
Turkish
the data
President
centers. Electricity is a cost item for them,
Tayyip
but it's nowhere near their
Erdogan
biggest cost item.
and his
They're
Russian
willing to do
counterpart
what's
Vladimir
necessary to get the
Putin.
right answer for Americans.
And then I believe the Secretary Burgum touched on this, but how are you deciding which companies would be taking place in this? Are we
Gazprom,
only talking about
Hungary's
hyperscalers or are other
MOL,
developers going to be
agreed
involved
on
too?
Serbia's
Developers,
NIS.
everyone that wants to bring a new large
Russian
load, we're
oil
going to see
company
large
Gazprom
manufacturing
and
plants. We're going to
Hungary's
see a giant
MOL
aluminum smelter
agreed
from
on
the
the
United
basic
States. We're going to
terms
see a
of a
large
future
scale
purchase
manufacturing. So
agreement
it's not just
for
data centers that are going to
Serbia's
bring new electricity
Naftna
load to the country. We're going to see a lot of it. And that's, of course, exactly what we want to see. We want to see
NIS.
America
Serbian
reindustrialize.
energy
We want to see
minister
jobs and opportunity. And so everyone is involved in that dialogue about how do we grow our capacity to allow this reindustrialization.
Handanovic confirmed on Monday. She
U.S.
noted
Energy
that
Secretary
Serbian
Chris Wright
ownership of
speaking
the
with our
company is to
colleague
be raised
Tyler
by
Kendall.
5%.
And we'll have more on the
And
impact
that
of the
partners
AI
from the
boom on
United
the energy
States,
in the region in the
Arab
next
Emirates
episode
are
of
also
Boomer Tech
included in
Asia.
the agreement.
That airs this Friday
The
at 30
negotiating
a.m.
sides
if you're
will
watching in
present
Hong Kong,
the deal
Thursday
to
7:30
the
p.m.
United
if
States
you're watching in
Treasury
New York. And
Office
these are
of
some of the
Foreign
stocks that we'll
Assets
keep an eye
Control,
on when trade opens in
OFAC, for
Japan
review.
shortly. Keep an eye on
Serbian
shares of
President
Mitsubishi after it agreed to buy
Aleksandar
Aethon Energy's U.S. gas and
said
pipeline assets
that
in what would be the
OFAC
biggest
should
purchase
decide
by a
on
Japanese
prolonging
company
the
in the American
operational
shale
license
sector.
for
Also,
NIS by
Mazda is
January
in
23rd.
focus after Nikkei reported that the car maker will delay the
Netflix
global launch of
earnings
its
preview.
EVs until
Tech and
2029
energy
or later.
dominate lineup.
Do stay with
As
us.
the
The market
earnings
opens
season
in
hit
Seoul and
its stride,
Tokyo are next
the
as we're
focus
seeing
of
some
attention this
downside
week will
across
be on
Asian
Netflix,
futures.
which
This is
leads the
Bloomberg.
charge on Tuesday by reporting its fourth quarter results in the wake of Warner Brothers. Discovery drama. Investors will scrutinize whether the record-breaking NFL Christmas viewership and a 190 million strong active could deliver the projected revenue growth of 17%. United Airlines and 3M will report their fourth quarter
This is
numbers
Asia Trade. We're counting down to
on
Asia's
the
major
same
market
day.
opens in what could turn out to
While
be a
more
risk-off session in
activity this
April
week
as
with
investors digest the latest
healthcare giant
threats coming from President
Johnson
Trump
and
on more
Johnson
tariffs on European
and the
countries
world's
over
second largest
Greenland. We are
oil
already
service
seeing
company,
gold, silver at
Halliburton
record highs.
grabbing the
Yeah, we're
spotlight
seeing
on
those
Tuesday.
record highs there
Intel
in
will
precious
update
metals
investors
and the search
on
for
its
safe
positive
havens. It'll be
strategy.
interesting to see how this
And
reflects
GE
on the yen, which, as we
Aerospace
know, has not so
on
much had
engine
those safe haven
deliveries
qualities of late in a week where we have been able to make a decision.
change.
Factor and gamma.
That's been interesting with the Japanese yen, right? Especially after it fell towards that 159 level last Wednesday. When we are talking about the trading week basis, we're talking about the lows against since 1990s, and right now we are seeing that upside against the U.S. greenback, and at the moment trading at that 157 level, so at the highest level in about a week or so. But of course, we're also digesting the fact that authorities here in Japan have come out trying to tell investors and warning them that the weakness in the currency will not be tolerated. We're seeing the Nikkei down 0.9% after we saw those gains in the previous session. We have the topics, for example, rounding about 4% last week, but that risk-off sentiment being felt across markets. Not to mention that we're also digesting the core machine orders that came out just a few minutes ago, and it was surprising to the downside both the month-on-month and year-on-year numbers. Core machine orders contracting for the month of November. The 10-year yield at 220, and we continue to watch, of course, the Takaichi trade. Japanese investors buying stocks, but also selling AUD, selling the Japanese yen. Take a look at how Korea is also coming online, because we have seen the downside pressure on the Korean won, despite authorities in that country also warning investors that they will try to rein in the weakness of the currency. You can see the cost now 0.2%, and after an incredible rally of what 90% or so in the past year, not to mention 15% gain since December. So the Kosdaq index up 0.3%. April.
Terry, as you highlighted there, it's all about positioning, right? And as both officers have been talking to us about in the past hour, we've been seeing this round in volatility and perhaps investors are pricing enough some of these geopolitical risks. So you are seeing that in the early goings in Asia, perhaps that dollar softness, that's interesting to see. But as we highlighted earlier, those paving plays are in the works for the moment. We also going to be watching how Europe assets in terms of futures, maybe we see that they start on the back foot, given how they have been in Europe doing fairly well when it comes to banks, defense names, export-related counters will be in focus. Maybe that's where the pressure point is for European asset sharing.
Alexander
Yeah, let's actually discuss where the markets could head this week. Joining us now is Julia Wang, North Asia CIO at the Mora. Julia, we have so much to contend with. Of course, we talked about all of the risks around geopolitics, not to mention we do have eco data out of China today. And of course, we are also contending about what happens to the Fed chair and any comments that could come up from President Trump in Davos. I mean, all of this noise, what are you focusing on to see sort of the direction of Asian assets?
To the construction of a new security
Traditionally, we built a robot, we built it to do one task. Atlas is designed to work anywhere and do any type of task. AI allows humanoids to be flexible and interchange what their role is as factory demands change. Monday provides the data, the knowledge, and the know-how to bring the robots to life into the world in a way that we've never had before.
Canada's inflation up from 2.2% to 2.4% in December. The consumer price index (CPI) in Canada rose 2.4% year-on-year in December, up from 2.2% in November. Statistics Canada said.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me. So, when we look at markets for this year, we really think that we are in a very different investment environment compared with the last couple of years. Really now, this year, we're starting to see some big structural shifts really coming ahead in markets. So, against all the constant noise that you just mentioned, the one constant everybody notices now is geopolitics and deglobalization. And we think that this year we'll see so many headlines around geopolitics that will just become a new normal as we invest. So we think that hedges against geopolitical risk becomes a necessity for investors this year. We do think that the market generally, the global economy generally, are still looking quite good from a fundamental perspective, because we have long-term growth drivers like AI really accelerating in 2026. We have policymakers that largely still have to back up the markets, being fiscal policy globally, local monetary policy from select countries. So the setup looks good, but we do think that this year diversification is really important because of all the risks, the headlines volatility like we see. That means the investors should not chase momentum, but instead they should look at value and compare that with growth. So we really think that diversification is important, and Asia really stands, I think, at a very unique juncture amongst its mega forces because it has strong growth, it has secular growth such as AI, it has a relatively stable economic policy, unlike some of the volatility and surprises you can see from Western economies. Asia, I think, is becoming a source of stability from at least from an investor perception perspective, and that could benefit Asia assets. Generally speaking, we do think the valuation generally in this part of the world is still pretty attractive as well. Even when you see, for example, Chinese tech companies and the Hang Seng Tech Index up 13% this month already. Yeah, I think that we look at China tech space, we really think there are two things that are starting to improve, right? One is, of course, we mentioned earlier, AI now is going global, and we know that increasingly China has its own strategic path around AI. That's related to how AI is developed in the West, but it's not completely on the same path. So I think it's a very interesting alternative exposure to AI development, and the pace of monetization is also faster in this part of the world. And secondly, I think that related to the geopolitical angle that you mentioned earlier, I think China is somewhat shielded from all this volatility around tariff policies, geopolitics, U.S.-U.S. relationship, things like that. I don't think it benefits as much, but it's, I think, a source of stability from an investor perspective that could benefit
that the Arctic island would not be Russia, but would stand firm on international market, in response to tariffs made by United States President
Trump. All AI-related companies are created equal.
The latest statement
have a preference class for hardware versus software when it comes to Chinese tech.
Do not change your mind.
Yeah, so I think that when we come to the broader way of playing AI, we have three favorite ways to do it at the moment. If we think about AI supply chains, we think that could be really interesting this year. Be it memory, which has already done so well for South Korea, or hardware generally in North Asia. If you think about all these components that are now seeing significant increase in demand, which are outpacing their supply. That could be North Asia, that could be Greater China, it could be Korea, and also to some degree, I think in the future, still over into Japan as well, because they're more upstream at this point. So I think that this segment out of AI is undervalued, is overlooked, and it could benefit because AI capex spending is ramping up globally, not just in the US. And particularly, I think China, when you think about large tech companies, we think that there are a broader angle to play AI because they're not necessarily just the infrastructure or the hardware. Instead, there are platforms with which some degree of monetization could also start to happen if we look at user engagement for large tech companies. They're starting to monetize at the same time as investing. So really, the whole life cycle really at play when you look at large tech companies in China as well.
Aside from AI, how else can investors diversify at a time where, as you mentioned earlier, your geopolitics in the backdrop? Is the attention supposed to be a bit more on these resource-rich markets? And how do you think we should go about it?
To fall at a lower pace than previously projected in the upcoming year due to the continued pandemic of rate growth, while the central bank indicates that the economy adjusted real gross domestic product will improve by 0.6%.
Yeah, so I think that's a very interesting point because there's clearly a rush, this earlier this year, since the beginning of this year, towards commodities, and that's maybe on the back of the geopolitical
shadow that's being cast around the world. Now, investors are noticing that there's a graph of resources. There's a be it raw materials, be it just normal commodities in general. So that is, I think, creating a bit of a push
Today's
for
article is
the
brought to
commodity
you by
complex. I do think from an economic cycle perspective, we do think
Executive
that you still have to be quite careful to think about
fresh
this
out
as
of
a
high
baseline
school, just joined
sort of
and
asset
enjoyed
allocation,
about career
because
unemployed.
we do think that
As a
unless
result
this
of
is more risk
Warcraft
US economy
Dragon
goes into
Slayer,
overheating or
after
inflation goes
slaying
out of
the
control, in
dragon,
which case these assets could benefit like they did in
Mom
2021. We're not quite
of
there
World
yet
of
in terms of our
Warcraft
economic forecast.
had to
We
offer
think
at
that
the time.
chances are that we're still
She
going to have
eventually stumbled
relatively robust
into an
global growth,
IT
but we don't
support
think inflation will
for a
necessarily
small
fly
company smack in the
as a
middle
base case.
of
So
the
I
good
think
old
that
United
yes, there's
States.
geopolitical angle that supports
While
commodity
in
in
this
general,
role,
but I do
Jess
think you have to be quite
encountered
tactical around it,
his
because a
first
lot still
tech
depends on that
fanboys,
inflation risk, and when it
people
comes
who
roaring back,
inexplicably
it's not our
get
base
so
case that
deep
it
into
does.
tech
So I think that
that
the
they
one
start
part of the
rooting
commodity
for
complex that we do
much
like is
like
actually
a
precious
sports
metal,
team.
because it has a more
One day,
tried and
Jazz
tested
picked up a
relationship with
Windows phone
geopolitics.
on a whim.
Increasingly, there's a
And
consensus
little did he
that
know
precious
it
metals
would
where
eventually
you
land him
use
a
to hedge
role
geopolitics. I would
as
just
a
mention is a
manager
constant in
for
markets
the
now. So we
biggest
think that
Windows
does
focused
deserve a
site
strategic
in the world.
allocation in of
This
itself.
is actually pretty cool.
Yeah, you can see gold right there trading at
Watching the
record highs
Windows
again. But
phone
Julia, just before we let you go, how will you be
8.1
factoring in the currency mechanism? Of course, when we talk about geopolitics, when we talk about central bank policy, the US dollar and what happens on the other side of the trade, with all of these Asian currencies have also ramifications.
I think that's a great point. I think, you obviously on the back of what happened overnight, in terms of news flow, you could see a bit of dollar strength, just because bilateral tariff threats are always in favor of the US dollar, it being the largest consumer in the world. But I do think that if you see an escalation, another round of tariff war, an escalation on the back of these threats,
Since joining
going back to what happened in April last year, the dollar continuously going into Liberation Day. So if we see that a severe escalation of trade tensions, tit for tat, tariff really starting to happen and becoming more of a reality, I think the dollar actually could, there'll be a limit to how much dollar can really benefit from that. Instead, as an investor, we'll start to think about more about diversification into assets where there may be a short-term hit, yes, they're top line from the revenue perspective, but their assets are cheaper and they have independent source of growth, be their domestic fiscal policy, monetary policy, or technology development. And Asia, I think, fiscal policy is being wrapped up in Japan and in China. Asia has an AI angle to it as well. So we think that over the medium term should support Asian currencies, generally speaking, maybe to the exception of the yen, where we do think they continue to stay weak for a little bit longer.
Pertaining to
yeah, I mean, we're seeing a little bit of strength in today's session, but that necessarily hasn't lasted for more days when we have seen it gain ground on safe haven trades. Julia Wan, good to have you with us, North Asia CIO, and the world with her insights. We have more ahead. This is
Xbox Cloud Gaming will get ad-supported access this year. Rumors coalesced after ad-support notices here in Detroit. Once again, by Mr. Jazz Cody. Users have been noticing that Xbox Cloud Gaming has begun referencing ad support while launching confirming Xbox has been on the back foot in some ways. In the wider
U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent discussing U.S. ambitions to take over Greenland, and we've already heard President Trump threatening tariffs on 8 European countries. Take a look at how havens are trading. We're seeing gold and silver reach record highs. Swiss franc is also gaining ground. The Japanese yen that lately hasn't really behaved as a safe haven asset is actually gaining ground against the greenback as well at a 1-week high. And you can see with the move in the commodity space how those miners in Australia are also
continue to
gaining
handle
ground, and all of this
traditional
coming
gaming
at a time, of course, when we
Nintendo
continue to
stock is
digest
down
the latest
30%
on the Greenland
over the
issue between
past
President
6
Trump
months
and the
as
European leaders. This is also
price
expected
hikes
to
spooked
be
the
talked about
investors.
at Davos as
And
well. That starts
PlayStation
this
is
week.
also
Let's bring
seeing
in Bloomberg
hardware
East Asia
declines
government
this
editor
year
John
as well.
Bershkovitz. John, so we've heard about
Despite
the
all
potential
the
of more tariffs from
macroeconomic
Europe
challenges
after we thought we
faced
had a trade
by
truce
some
between
of
the
the
U.S. and
traditional
Europe back
platforms,
in the summer. So
Steam
what's
and
next
PC
year?
gaming has
Yeah,
continued to
I mean,
rise.
we have these tariff threats. February
Quarterly
1st,
and old school
10%,
variety,
June for the
core
25%.
gaming market.
But the rhetoric is
Steam and
turning up.
PC
The
gaming in general
Europeans are also
has
trying to
seen
look at mechanisms that they can
disproportionate
use
growth
that can counter this.
over
A few
the
things that are
last
going
year.
on. We have the
Younger
US-EU
cohorts
trade
with
deal,
growing
which
purchasing
hasn't been
power
approved yet by the
seek
EU
to emulate
It's going to be
streamers
halted
and
or
access
delayed.
modern tools,
France is
Steam
backing something
sales,
called the trade
and
bazooka,
other
which are these anti-collusion
PC-oriented
measures which could
benefits.
go after American goods, services, and
Microsoft
really
has
take
been
up
seeking
this
its
hard.
own growth
And
on
also,
PC too via
Europeans
Xbox
looking
Game
at
Pass
measures just
and
to
the Xbox
keep
PC
things at bay
Store,
and perhaps remove
alongside
the
OEM PC
trade
Xbox devices
trade
like
restrictions
the
for
Xbox
about
One.
93
Another
billion
weapon
euros
Microsoft has
they
in
took
its
on
arsenal
these, they
is
put these
cloud
on the
gaming,
back burner, these
which
could
has
come up
become
again.
increasingly
So
viable
Europe is looking
over
at
the
stuff.
last year.
America's just turning up the
Xbox
heat as well.
Cloud
But to be
gaming
fair, President Trump
has
has been
gotten
talking about Greenland
rather
since
good.
what, 2019 or
Over
so,
the
right?
last
How do
couple
you
of years,
wind down the
and it
tensions
could
at
be
this
slated
juncture?
for an
Yeah,
even
it
bigger
doesn't seem like it's
expansion
off ramp.
in the coming weeks or months ahead.
When you left work last week, you worried about things most tech CEOs worry about.
Users began to
This
spot
week, PwC's
that while
industry edge,
launching games
you're
on
not thinking like a
Xbox
tech
Cloud
company,
Gaming,
but more
a
like
new
an investor.
message pops up. 1 hour of ad-supported playtime per session.
We're always overestimating
Some
what AI
began
can do
wondering
in the next 6
if
months,
this meant
but I think we're
that all tiers of
underestimating what it
Xbox
will
Cloud
do in
Gaming
the longer
are
term.
slated
When
to
we're
receive ads.
reimagining the
But
workflow
our
with
sources
AI, that's
suggest
where you
this
have the greatest
message
success.
is inevitable.
The catalytic force is really the
As I
American
reported
growth
last year,
mindset. That
Microsoft has
belief
been
that you can
exploring
always
ads
do better.
for
That
Xbox
ultimately
Cloud
drives
Gaming.
this flywheel of
And
ambition
while
and
seeking
innovation that make
clarification
America so
about
unique
this
as a growth
message,
region.
it was confirmed to me that the ads will appear separately
Yeah,
on
I mean, we
Xbox
have the
Cloud
high-level
Gaming
talks for sort of last week
for those who
between
have
US
purchased
Denmark and Greenland.
Xbox
So
games
there's
digitally
anything that's going on.
but don't
But
have
there's
Xbox Game
off ramp
Pass.
that is appearing right now. The
Microsoft
thing
has
is, there
hundreds of
is a
games
solution to
available
this.
to
It's a
buy
1951 treaty to US
via
Denmark,
Xbox
which allows
Cloud
for the
Gaming.
US to have
But as
military
of writing,
presence there.
you need at least
After
one
the
tier of
Israeli
Xbox
presence
Game
was
Pass
quite
to
large,
access.
it's being wound down.
This session-based
Microsoft is also
ad-supported
looking at
access
trading
tier
mineral
will
deals
change
and negotiate trading mineral deals. So if you're in that security,
Xbox
more
Cloud
troops in,
Gaming
more monitors there,
has been something
more
of a
troops
hot
and military
topic
presence,
as of
they
late,
do more economical
given that
warfare,
the demand
resource
is for
exploitation.
enough prices of components
Traditionally
traditionally used in local gaming hardware, such as DRAM and even solid-state drives and parts. Many manufacturers have been increasing prices of components and critical
John, to
gaming
what
devices
extent
too,
does it matter to
such
Trump
as
that he
the
might not
PS5,
get congressional
Xbox
backing on
Series
this, given what we
X,
saw in Venezuela?
S, and the Nintendo Switch.
Sure. We've seen some pushback from Congress, both sides of the aisle, Republicans as well. No concrete actions were
Cloud
taken
streaming
yet.
services like Xbox Cloud Gaming and NVIDIA GeForce
Congress
now have been eyed as a potential challenge for users priced out of local hardware. But it's not as if these services are insulated from price increases too. Cloud gaming costs money to sustain and run as well, and uses all of the same parts and components. However, during periods of low use, compute from the cloud gaming service can also be adapted
John, thank you so
for
much.
other
Our
uses,
Bloomberg East Asia
such as
government editor
AI
John Hatzkovitz.
and other
Let's take a look at how
enterprise-grade
your assets are
processors.
faring in terms of futures. We
The
are
worst
seeing
in the
them
world
pointing to
of
those
cloud economics
declines pretty much as anticipated. That's the reaction
If
function
your servers
to
are sitting
Trump's
there doing
machinations
nothing,
against
you're wasting money.
the major
So
allies. This
opening
clear
up a
escalation
door
that we're seeing in
to free
relation to
Xbox
Greenland.
Cloud
What's
gaming
also interesting
services
though is when it
delivered
comes
by
to the
ads
FX, you're seeing
like
euro-dollar pick up.
is
With the
potentially
green
another
light on
way
the back foot,
of
that
ensuring
speaks to
during
perhaps how
any
investors see
swing
this policy
remain
mismatch
tight.
as a sort of
consistent.
for the US,
It
something to
helps
consider as
justify
well when we
further
look at
data
markets.
census
Not only
mentioned,
with President
and
Trump
also
setting up his
anchors
visit to
Xbox
the World
feature
Economic Forum
in a
in
universe
Switzerland,
where cloud
shaking
and
up the
AI is
foundation of both the EU
dominating
and the NATO
Microsoft's
alliance.
spending.
Again, that's really interesting to watch. Let's bring in Bloomberg Chief
It
Asia
remains to
correspondent
be
Rosalind
seen
Matheson.
exactly
So,
when
Rosalind,
this
we're
will
talking
roll
about the
out,
timing of
but
all
I'm
of this.
told
Is
it's
this World
coming this
Economic
year.
Forum turning into Trump's Economic Forum in
Xbox
a
Cloud
way?
Gaming
Well,
has
certainly all
seen
eyes will be on
double
him.
digit
You know,
growth
other things
for
will be
Microsoft
discussed at Davos
and has
this
been
week, including
particularly
issues
strong
around
in
AI,
regions
but
where
really
tariffs,
it's going to be
taxes,
Donald Trump's
and
show.
other
That's why all the
economic
leaders are
factors
there.
make
CEOs been
traditional
watching him. I mean,
hardware
a year ago
purchases
they were trying to get
prohibitively
just a few
expensive.
clues as president. What kind of president
Microsoft
is he
expanded
going to be?
Xbox
This time
Cloud
they want to
Gaming
kind of
to
pick his
India
speech apart to
late last
understand
year
where he's going
and has its
one
eyes
year
in
in. And
other regions,
obviously, you know, he's
Asia
used that
and
year
Africa,
to
for
disrupt
example.
a lot of things in
On
the
the
world
high end,
order, a rapidly
Xbox
shifting
has
sphere of
ultimate
influence
members
game
can
that's now
now
going on in
stream
Europe, the
some
US,
games
and
with
Asia. So
boosted
what's he
bit
going to
rates
say? I mean, we
at
had Scott Bessent, the Treasury
1,440
Secretary,
p.
saying the US is projecting strength, Europe is projecting
Follow
weakness.
Windows
That's
Central
really
on
the
Google
mantra that
News
this
to
administration
keep
has been
our
saying over and over again. Is
latest
Trump
news,
going to come in
insights, and
and say that
features
again? Is
at
this his
the top
platform
of
again to
your
say why he
feeds.
thinks the US should acquire Greenland, whether by it or by
Jeff
force?
Gordon is
And
the
what is
executive
the audience
editor
going to be
at
to
Windows
that?
Central.
And what kind of
You can
clues
link
does
up
that
with him
give
on
those
LinkedIn,
present,
email, or on
including
X,
European leaders, about how to
focusing
respond to
primarily
this? I mean,
on
how
all
do
things
you
Xbox and
counter
gaming.
all of
Jess
this?
is
Do
known
you
for
try and
breaking
change that
exclusive
narrative
news
to
and
project
analysis
strength?
as
Do
it
you have to
relates to
sort
the
of
Microsoft
stand up to
ecosystem
Donald Trump,
while being powered
including
by
on
the
trade
team.
or including over
Follow us
NATO?
on
Or
Twitter
do you find ways to
X
try and get him to
and tune
diffuse
in to
his
the
own actions? So
XP2
certainly,
podcast,
you know, this is going to be
all
Donald Trump
about, you
sweeping
guessed
into
it,
Davos very
Xbox.
much with everybody
Not a
hanging on
bad
his
module,
words.
Yeah, I mean, you raise a good point, right?
nicely
How
put together,
European leaders appealing
and
to Trump
let
and
us
acquiescing to him.
continue
Clearly, that hasn't
with
worked.
the Spanish
What are we watching
example
in
segment.
perhaps whether he will face
Everybody
a
take a
hostile
straight.
audience?
Oh man.
Well, it's interesting because Europe's kind of really grappled with how to
Oh
do
my
this, and
goodness,
some
yeah, it
leaders
is
have got
freezing.
differing points of view.
It
You've
is
got
freezing.
Emmanuel Macron, the French president, who's been talking about using the anti-coercion mechanism for a while now. You've got other leaders in Europe, perhaps, who are more aligned with Donald Trump, including the Hungarian
So
leader Viktor
let us
Orban.
begin
So
with
it's difficult for the EU to sometimes act as a bloc because you do have
let's go
differing
to the
points of
focus,
view.
which is
You've got
sports.
Giorgia Meloni, the Italian leader, who's quite close to Trump, saying, "Let me have a go at see if I can get him to de-escalate." But the reality is Europe sometimes undersells itself. It does have a lot of economic clout. It can use it to
David
potentially
Hernández
damage the
Abreu,
US economy. It's a very big region
presidente
with a
de
strong
Águilas
military if it wants to use that
García
clout
Suárez,
as well. So it does have some
no
cards
se
here. It's
cumplió
just that
con los
it's always been a bit
títulos
tentative
59
about using them and saying,
de
let's try instead to
regimientos
negotiate to get Donald Trump to step down from some of his rhetoric.
enero
So perhaps Europe
19,
will continue to wrestle with
2016.
itself on how to do that. But we are seeing signs that they're
Santiago,
moving towards perhaps some stronger mechanisms, at least
República
on trade.
Dominicana. Las Águilas
What about the
Ibaeñas
clout from the actual
reconocieron
companies that will be
que el
hurt by
pasado
these
viernes
tariffs? What are we expecting from the
inscribieron
CEOs?
en el roster del día a 9 jugadores importados. Sin embargo, consideran que la medida tomada por la Liga Dominicana de Béisbol Inglaterra de anular se encontró no, de anular ese encuentro es improcedente. Víctor García Suárez, presidente de las Águilas, manifestó que la Lidón debió amonestar al conjunto ciudadano con otro tipo de penalización y no de la anular el partido del encuentro celebrado el 16
Well,
de
certainly the
enero
US
en
CEOs are
La Habana.
probably pretty happy as long as their business continues as usual
Los
because they like
toros
the
del
rhetoric
este
of the Trump
para
administration.
que se
America
juegue
first resonates
nuevamente.
with them, bringing jobs back to America, bringing manufacturing back to
Sino
America,
más
you know, leveling the playing field they
que
see
sea con una
overseas. That's
multa
been Donald Trump's mantra for too
porque
long.
se trata
US
de
companies
algo
have been taken
administrativo.
advantage of overseas,
Señaló
and so
García
they
Suárez
like that
al
rhetoric.
ofrecer
And certainly,
declaraciones
you know,
vía
tech
telefónica
CEOs particularly have fallen in line strongly behind the Trump administration, meeting with him frequently. They like the fact that he's trying to push back against tech regulation in the EU, for example, and trying to crack open the China market again and trying bit by bit perhaps to draw away China on critical minerals. I mean, that's a very long-term prospect, but they do like his rhetoric at least. But if it starts to hit them again in terms of the EU responding, for example, heavily on trade, that does damage important markets for US companies, and so there is a flip side to all of that. But if you're a European CEO, you're probably going to be at Davos trying to understand how on earth you navigate this business environment right now, and how you diversify. I mean, that's really the word that everyone's using around trade and business is diversification. So you're there trying to work out what alternate markets do you have potentially to the US.
And the words that the American public are using right now, housing, affordability, those are the key priorities for the public, right? How is this Davos, networking of the ultra rich, and President Trump being there going to sit with them?
Well, he does like to project strength overseas, to project strength at home. So he says to the American people, look, I'm standing up for you on the global stage. I'm protecting US interests and creating jobs. But as you say, is there a disconnect at home on some of that in terms of the economy? Do people feel that they're actually benefiting from his policies and all that talk around affordability to many people in the economy going into a year when Donald Trump faces midterm elections? And is there going to be a lot of campaigning around the state of the US economy, and does he have some risk potentially there as a result, around healthcare as well, affordability of healthcare as well as housing? And so he's trying to project an image of him bringing benefits back to the US people, how they're actually feeling it.
For Trump in an election year. Thank you so much, Rosalind Matheson, Bloomberg Chief Asia Correspondent. Great to have you with us. Stay tuned all week on Bloomberg TV for our special coverage of the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. Hear from political and business leaders shaping the global agenda. We have more ahead on the Asia trade. This is Bloomberg.
Que tienen los jugadores con la situación, entendiendo que ellos jugaron duro para ganar ese partido.
Now, as we count down to the open of China trade, traders also awaiting a deluge of data out of the Asian giant in the coming hour, with fourth quarter GDP and December activity indicators expected to confirm that growth slowed towards the end of last year. For August Green, our Chief North Asia correspondent, Stephen Engel. So, Steve, is Beijing's growth target of around 5% under threat?
Dentro de la
I
organización,
think they pretty much got that in the bag. There was some strength in the beginning part of the year, and yes, we've had a little bit of stability in retail sales and industrial production on a month-over-month basis. But if you look at the base effects year-over-year, there was a softening towards the end of the year. So yes, these December numbers are not going to look very pretty. The fourth quarter GDP number is not going to look very pretty. It's going to be below that 5% number. Likely, the estimate is for 4.5% GDP growth. Our retail sales growth of just about 1% is the consensus. Bloomberg Economics actually is a little more bearish at 0.9%. Also, we have to look at factory output. December industrial output expected to come in a little bit higher than November, except again, Bloomberg Economics a little more pessimistic. They're saying 4.7%. So the retail sales, that's something that authorities in the Communist Party gatherings at the end of the last year and heading towards the March National People's Congress, they put consumption and domestic demand as a main priority. But again, there haven't been any meaningful policies yet to really pick up the household spending. This is likely to represent a seventh consecutive month, the December numbers, of a slowing pace of gains in retail sales. We're getting down towards zero. So again, we'll have to kind of put our sights towards the policy moves that might happen after the Lunar New Year holiday, which comes late this year. We'll look at those consumption numbers at the Lunar New Year holiday and see if there changes the calculus at all at the National People's Congress. But right now, it looks as though, yes, they're going to hit the full year 5% or around 5%, but the fourth quarter looks like it's tailing off a little bit to kind of begs the question, will there be some sort of meaningful stimulus into the first part of the year?
go back to
And of
health,
course, a lot of the
with the
fluctuation
salute.
perhaps also to do with what was happening between the US and China and those trade tensions and how some of these companies were trying to stockpile goods and so forth. But what's interesting to note was that when it came to critical minerals, despite the trade truce that we now have, we saw a drop in Chinese rare earth.
Okay, we could do this module is also going to count for help, so we'll probably have about 4 for today. Los chatbots de inteligencia artificial AI saltan al sector salud. Europa Press Madrid, Santiago, República Dominicana, Listín Diario. Los chatbots de IA saltan al sector de salud.
Well, I think that has to do, well, it might be an aberration, but I think it has a lot to do, and that's what commodities traders are looking at, whether the tensions, the increased tension between Japan and China is affecting those December export numbers of rare earths. Because you're absolutely right. The numbers indicate that there were fewer shipments of rare earths, in particular to places like, well, actually, I can't say particularly Japan. The anecdotal evidence is that it's been dropping. Ministry of Commerce has talked about their, increasing scrutiny on rare earth exports to Japan. But these export figures covered shipments to all destinations and didn't provide a breakdown by geography or category. So you have to kind of read between the headlines and see, well, there are trade restrictions, perhaps bigger export curbs and more licensing curbs for export of these rare earths to places like Japan indicate that is a reason why the exports actual numbers from the Customs Bureau indicates that it's dropped off from November numbers. We'll have to look at whether this is a longer term trend or not with more monthly numbers going forward.
Yeah, our Chief North Asia correspondent Stephen Engel, as we await those economic numbers out of China, of course, we have the fourth quarter GDP numbers, also the activity data. Coming at a time when we're watching the offshore yuan as well, which has strengthened about 8 weeks against the US greenback. And that to do not only with what's happening inside China, but the dollar has weakened. Traders now fleeing to haven assets today as well amid tariff-related worries across markets. Bloomberg Intelligence Chief Asia FX and Rate Strategist Stephen Chu joins us now for more. And of course, we are just digesting the latest tariff threats coming from President Trump over Greenland on European allies. What are your expectations on how this will play out in the currency space?
Relacionados con
I mean, if you just look at the euro, you look at the pound, it dipped a little bit upon market open, but it has recovered. I think the market now figure out it's going to be something like last April, or like when people talk about the taco trade, it's like Trump always retract whatever he throw out on trade tariff. And the more the US does on the geopolitical front, it's going to hurt the dollar. So now we saw a weaker dollar, we saw a rally in safe haven currencies like the Japanese yen, like the Swiss franc. Even the Asian currencies are very benefit as a safe haven at this juncture.
The thesis about a weaker US dollar, there perhaps some factors that could dispel that. We have inflation data that's out this week as well out of the US. And then maybe investors also perhaps changing their bets on who might be Fed chair in the second half of the year and how dovish is that really going to be.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting because everybody talks about the Fed is going to lose independence. They talk about a more dovish new Fed chair. But given what Powell said earlier this month, like what happened, in fact, the odds of him staying on until May and being less dovish until then, it's a positive for US rates, it's a positive for the dollar. So there are a lot of moving parts going on in the world that sort of support the dollar and weaken the dollar. But what's most important, of course, is on the global front, geopolitical action. So what the US does, for example, Venezuela, and now we have the Greenland and other European countries, that's going to be more important as a dollar driver. So I think US data, the Fed expectation is going to take a second driving seat compared to geopolitics for now.
Por su parte,
given the geopolitics over Greenland, of course, the potential tariffs on the European countries, what does that mean for the euro? We saw early losses for the pound already this morning.
Yeah, because I think,
now we can
of course,
power
one
up
thing we bet
because
on the taco trade, so meaning that the Trump will
took
sort
a
of
lot out
retract
of
on that. But even if the tariffs go ahead and somewhat hurt the European countries, I mean, there's this longer, more important implication that the U.S. is going to be more aggressive in terms of tariff and even military action in terms of Venezuela. So again, that's going to hurt the dollar ultimately. So in the FX space, of course, it's very hard to say like where the euro, the pound's going to go over the next month. But of course, now the best choice, the most credible safe haven currency is going to be gold. If you look at gold, whether the dollar strengthens earlier this year or weakens, gold benefit, and we're still hitting record highs. So it's the best currency choice at the moment.
The best haven play, I guess. Or what about some of the other havens like the yen?
Yen benefit for now for this instance, but if you look at Japan, if you look at the fiscal concern that market has been expressing, it's still going to weaken later if this sort of a safe haven flow tapers. So there's still all this election, and of course the BOJ dilemma with the government finances. So the yen could still weaken, but from a carry perspective, it still is favored the dollar. So if you ask me, maybe the Swiss franc might be a better choice compared to the yen. And Chinese yuan now this year will play a big role in safe haven. Not just talk about the fundamental reasons that support the Chinese yuan. I mean, now it's very clear that the Trump administration is focusing on the Western Hemisphere and to some extent Europe. So it's going to benefit Russia and China, and hence from an ethical perspective, the yuan could play a safe haven role even on the geopolitical front for now.
When you left work last week, you're worried about things most tech CEOs worry about. This week, PwC's Industry Edge, you're not thinking like a tech company, but more like an investor.
ChatGPT no sustituye en ningún caso la asistencia médica, sino que se plantea como una herramienta para dar respuestas a preguntas cotidianas. Very nicely put together. So we are finishing with the Spanish test. So we're going to do the introduction to linear algebra, and then we'll move on to our simulator, and we'll get started on the module on the breakdown. So the market should be almost commenced.
What to expect on the currency space as we continue to digest, of course, what's happening with President Trump, the facilities over Greenland and potential tariffs on Europe, but April also digesting what's happening with the potential Fed chair nominee. Of course, we continue to really speculate on who could head the central bank in the U.S. We have seen 4 potential candidates for the Fed chair, and they include BlackRock's Regional Economic Advisor Kevin Hassett, Fed Governor Christopher Waller, and former Governor
return
to be getting a little bit more insight into the thinking of the president.
Few more modules, baby. Let's go. I got the best teacher in the world, baby. I'll let you.
Secretary Scott Bessent had to say about the potential nominees.